The Dominion's vast empire stretched across countless worlds, its rule absolute and unquestioned. For centuries, its fleets had crushed any resistance, its soldiers had marched over broken civilizations, and its name alone had inspired terror in the hearts of lesser species. But in the cold darkness of space, where empires rose and fell like flickering stars, something had begun to stir. A whisper in the void, a shadow in the dark, a name that had yet to be spoken aloud: humanity. The Dominion had long heard of them, but never had they considered the insignificant species to be worth their concern. That was a mistake. Aboard the Dominion's command station, Grand Marshal Velkar stood before a vast array of holographic displays, his sharp reptilian eyes scanning the reports that scrolled before him. The Dominion's patrols had intercepted whispers of insurgents, insignificant rebels attempting to disrupt the natural order. It was a song he had heard before, and he had no patience for it. The Dominion did not tolerate defiance. His talons tapped against the control panel as he studied the latest reports from their outer colonies. A few supply convoys had gone missing, a minor irritation at best. Velkar had no reason to believe that anything unusual was happening. Then the reports had shifted. Dominion outposts wiped out. Fleets vanished. And now, an entire stronghold, one of their fortified citadels, had gone silent. Not overrun, not attacked. Just gone. Velkar's gaze narrowed. The Dominion did not lose entire fortresses. Something was different. Something was wrong. He turned to his officers, his voice a low growl. Deploy the fleet. I want the truth. The Dominion's fleet surged into motion, warships moving through space like an unstoppable tide. They had subjugated 1,000 species. They had shattered 100 rebellions. They had no reason to believe this time would be any different. And yet, as they approached the last known coordinates of their missing stronghold, a silence hung in the void like a waiting predator. The planet below them was barren, the citadel that should have stood there was gone. Not destroyed, not ruined. Gone. As if it had never existed. The Dominion's forces spread out, scanning, searching, trying to understand. And that was when the first ship disappeared. One moment it was there, strong, proud, armed with the full might of the Dominion's technology. The next, it was nothing but an empty void on their sensors. No explosion, no energy signature, just an absence where once there had been something. The fleet went on high alert. Orders were shouted, weapons primed, shields raised. But it did not matter. One by one, the warships began to vanish. The Dominion's commanders screamed into their comms, demanding answers, demanding explanations. There were none. From the darkness of space they came. Silent, unseen, a phantom force that moved with precision beyond anything the Dominion had encountered before. They did not announce themselves. They did not speak. They did not demand surrender. The only sign of their presence was the growing number of empty voids where warships had once been. Velkar watched in horror as his mighty fleet, the pride of the Dominion, was being dismantled like a child's toy. And then, at last, the silence was broken. A single transmission, broadcast across all frequencies, spoken in a language the Dominion had dismissed as primitive. You were warned. The voice was calm, measured, devoid of malice or anger. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. Velkar clenched his fists. He did not know this enemy, but he understood one thing: whoever they were, they had planned this. The Dominion had thought itself invincible, untouchable. But someone had been watching, waiting, preparing. And now, the war had begun. Velkar's talons clenched the armrest of his command throne. If the enemy thought the Dominion would fall so easily, they were mistaken. He turned to his officers, his voice cold, calculated. Find them. Hunt them down. We will burn their worlds. But even as he gave the order, something gnawed at the back of his mind. The Dominion had faced countless enemies. They had crushed species who thought themselves clever, who believed they could challenge the might of an empire that had stood for centuries. And yet, this was different. The Dominion was not just losing ships. It was losing control. For the first time, the Predator was beginning to understand what it meant to be hunted. The remaining Dominion warships regrouped, forming defensive formations as their scanners frantically searched for the enemy. It was futile. The silence in the void was absolute. And then, without warning, the enemy revealed themselves. From the shadows of space, sleek warships emerged, ships unlike any the Dominion had ever faced. Dark hulls absorbed the faint starlight, rendering them nearly invisible to the naked eye. Their movements were precise, deliberate, their tactics flawless. And for the first time, the Dominion saw their enemy. Humanity. The first volley came with terrifying precision. Beams of energy lanced through the void, striking at the Dominion's warships with ruthless efficiency. Shields buckled, hulls ruptured, explosions bloomed in the darkness. The Dominion returned fire, their own weapons lighting up the void. But for every shot they fired, their enemy was already gone, slipping back into the shadows like ghosts in the dark. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Velek's mind raced. How had this happened? How had a species the Dominion had dismissed as unimportant risen to such a threat? The answer was clear: humanity had learned. They had studied. They had prepared. While the Dominion had basked in its own power, believing itself untouchable, humanity had been watching. And now they were ready. The Dominion's losses mounted. The fleet was breaking. Velek knew he had only one option left. Retreat. The word burned in his throat. The Dominion did not retreat. But this was not a battle they could win. The warships that remained turned and fled, vanishing into the depths of space. The silence returned, broken only by the scattered wreckage drifting in the void. And then, once more, the voice came through the comms. This is only the beginning. Velek stared into the darkness, his claws digging into his armrests. This was not just an uprising. This was not just another rebellion to be crushed. This was war. And for the first time, the Dominion was afraid. As the battered fleet limped away from the ruins of their latest skirmish, Captain Kane stood on the bridge of the ESS Pathfinder, staring at the tactical display. The battle had been brutal, a desperate struggle against overwhelming odds, and they had barely managed to escape. The Starn Confederation had made it clear that humanity's expansion into the galactic stage would not be met with open arms, but with fire and steel. The ESS Pathfinder and its fleet were no longer just explorers. They were fugitives in a hostile galaxy. Dr. Aisha Kim sat in the ship's main research lab, poring over the data from the battle. The quantum folding drive had once again saved them, allowing them to jump beyond the Starn fleet's pursuit range. But each use of the drive took a toll on the ship. The energy fluctuations were becoming unpredictable, and the last jump had nearly destabilized the core. Aisha knew they were pushing the limits of technology, but they had no choice. Every battle left them with fewer resources and fewer allies. Commander Nathan Cole entered the lab, his face lined with exhaustion. "We can't keep running forever, Aisha. The Confederation is going to keep hunting us until we have nowhere left to go." Aisha sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know. But we're not ready for another direct fight. We need time. Time to repair, time to strategize." Nathan hesitated before speaking. "What if we didn't have to run anymore? What if we had a place where they couldn't follow?" Aisha frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I've been analyzing some old star charts," Nathan said, placing a data pad in front of her. "There's a system on the edge of map space. It's been marked as unstable, but we have no real data on it. If we go there, we might be able to hide long enough to regroup." Aisha studied the map. The system was marked as a dead zone, a region of space where navigation was treacherous due to gravitational anomalies. If the Confederation had deemed it too dangerous to explore, then perhaps it was their best chance to disappear. She looked up at Nathan. "It's a risk. Everything we do is a risk," he countered. "But we can't keep running forever. We need a place to stand, to build. If we can set up a proper base, we can start thinking about taking the fight back to them." Elias Kane agreed. The decision was made, and the fleet altered course for the uncharted system. The journey took days, during which tensions aboard the ship grew. Supplies were running low, and morale was beginning to falter. The crew had left Earth with the hope of making history as pioneers, not as exiles fighting for survival. When they arrived at the system, the sight that greeted them was unexpected. Instead of a barren, inhospitable region, they found a cluster of planets surrounding a dying star. One of the planets was habitable, covered in thick forests and vast oceans. But what truly caught their attention was the massive structure orbiting the planet, a derelict space station of unknown origin. Scans revealed that the station was ancient, predating any known civilization in the galaxy. It was damaged, with large sections exposed to the vacuum of space, but its core remained intact. The discovery sent ripples of excitement and apprehension through the crew. If they could repair the station, it could serve as their hidden sanctuary. Landing parties were dispatched to the station and the planet's surface. On the station, they found corridors lined with alien technology, consoles covered in symbols no one could decipher. It was clear that whoever had built it had long since vanished. On the planet below, teams discovered remnants of an advanced civilization, cities now reduced to ruins, overgrown with vegetation. The eerie silence of the world spoke of a forgotten history, one that they were now stepping into. Dr. Aisha Kim and her team worked tirelessly to restore power to the station. As they reactivated the systems, fragments of data began to emerge. The station had once been part of a vast network, a hub for an ancient empire that had collapsed long ago. But something else lurked in the data, something troubling. Records spoke of a catastrophic event, a war that had ended the empire. The enemy they had faced was unknown, but the final transmissions warned of a relentless force that had swept through the galaxy, leaving only silence in its wake. Elias Kane listened to the reports with a growing sense of unease. They had sought refuge here, but had they just walked into a graveyard? And if this ancient enemy had truly wiped out a civilization, was it still out there? Meanwhile, the Starn Confederation had not given up the hunt. A scout ship had traced the energy signature of the Pathfinder's last jump. When the Confederation warships arrived at the system's edge, they hesitated. The gravitational anomalies made navigation difficult, and long-range scans showed the remnants of an unknown civilization. But they would not turn back. Humanity's defiance had become an embarrassment, and the Confederation was determined to crush them. Unaware of the looming threat, the crew of the Pathfinder pressed on. As they worked to fortify their new home, they began to unearth more about the fallen civilization. Artifacts, databanks, even remnants of advanced weaponry hinted at the power this lost empire had once wielded. Among the discoveries was a massive underground facility on the planet's surface. The entrance had been sealed for centuries, but with their technology, they managed to break through. What they found inside changed everything. The facility housed a dormant AI, a guardian of the lost empire. When it reactivated, it spoke in a language that had not been heard in eons. As Aisha and her team struggled to communicate with it, they realized it was not merely an archive, but a warning system. The AI had been left behind to ensure that no one would awaken what had been buried beneath the planet. The warnings came too late. In their attempt to access the facility's deeper chambers, they had triggered something. A pulse of energy surged through the ruins, sending a signal into the void of space. The crew watched in horror as the AI's systems translated the final message. "They are coming." Above the planet, the Confederation fleet had entered the system. But as they moved toward the human settlement, their sensors detected something else. A disturbance beyond the far edge of the system, something massive moving through the darkness. Captain Kane stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder, staring at the readings. The crew had thought they had found refuge. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping for untold millennia. And now, it was coming for them all. The council chamber was in chaos. The revelation of humanity's true strength had shaken the foundations of the Galactic Union, and the aftermath of the disastrous attempt to suppress them was now unfolding in real time. Representatives from every major species bickered and shouted over one another, their voices merging into a cacophony of fear and anger. The High Chancellor struggled to maintain order, his gavel slamming against the podium repeatedly. Silence! He roared, his usually composed demeanor slipping into raw frustration. The room gradually quieted, though the tension remained thick in the air. Across the chamber, Admiral Kalos sat rigid, his hands clenched into fists. The humiliation of the Union fleet's defeat still burned in his chest. He had underestimated the humans, as had they all, and now they faced the consequences of their arrogance. The reports from the front lines were worse than they had feared. Not only had humanity repelled the Union's forces, but they had launched counteroffensives with a precision and brutality that left entire sectors in disarray. Worlds that had once been under Union control were now falling, one by one, to the relentless advance of the human war machine. A representative from the Zalari species, their elongated features pulled into an expression of distress, spoke first. "We must negotiate. This war is spiraling out of control. If we do not attempt diplomacy, we may all suffer the consequences." "Negotiate?" scoffed the war minister of the Zorvath Dominion, a reptilian species known for their martial prowess. "They have no reason to negotiate. We attacked them. We betrayed our own treaties. Why would they ever trust us now?" His words carried a grim weight, and no one could refute them. Across the vastness of space, aboard the UN warship Resolute, Captain Adrian Voss studied the latest reports with a heavy heart. The war had escalated beyond what anyone had anticipated. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had turned into a full-scale conquest. The humans had realized something terrifying. They were stronger than the Union, not just in firepower, but in their adaptability and unyielding nature. The Union had expected them to break under pressure. Instead, they had only grown sharper, more ruthless. Now, the question was no longer whether humanity would survive. It was whether the Union would. Voss turned to his chief strategist, Commander Evelyn Cross, who wore a grim expression. "The latest intelligence suggests the Union is in complete disarray. The Fraud Dominion has withdrawn its forces to defend its core worlds, and the Zalari have outright surrendered. Even the Zorvath are questioning their loyalty to the Council." Voss exhaled, his thoughts racing. "We've come further than we ever expected. We could push forward, take more worlds, force them into unconditional surrender. But at what cost?" Cross met his gaze evenly. "At this point, sir, I don't think they'll ever let humanity exist peacefully. We've proven we're too dangerous. If we stop now, they'll only rebuild and come for us again when they think they have the advantage." He knew she was right. The war had passed the point of no return. If humanity wanted to be safe, they had to ensure that the Union could never threaten them again. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Union's capital world, the High Chancellor convened an emergency meeting with his inner council. The reality of the situation was bleak. Their forces were outmatched, their strategies ineffective. The humans had taken every weapon used against them and turned it back on their enemies tenfold. The thought of what humanity could become in the next few decades, centuries, was a nightmare they could not afford to ignore. Desperation hung heavy in the chamber as the Chancellor turned to his intelligence director. "What options do we have?" The director hesitated before answering. "There is one last resort. We could attempt to negotiate surrender on our terms, but we would need something to bargain with. A show of goodwill. A sacrifice." Silence filled the chamber as they considered what that sacrifice might be, and whether it would be enough to appease the unstoppable force that humanity had become. The battle raged on, the relentless exchange of fire lighting up the void like an artificial storm. The enemy fleet, though formidable, had not anticipated the sheer tenacity of the human forces. Every tactical maneuver they executed was met with an even more calculated response. Captain Vance stood firm on the bridge, his eyes locked onto the strategic map. The time for defense had passed, now was the time to strike. "Target their command vessel," he ordered, his voice unwavering. "We cut off the head, and the body will follow." The ship's cannons roared to life, unleashing devastating firepower that tore through the enemy lines. Zara Korin, stationed at the weapons console, worked with precise efficiency, each volley aimed at the weak points of their adversaries. Beside her, Jackson Mirek monitored the enemy movements, calculating their desperate attempts to regroup. "They're adapting fast," he warned, his fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "They know they can't win in a straight fight, so they're shifting their formations." Vance acknowledged the insight with a nod, already considering their next move. "Then we stay unpredictable. Adjust our vectors, keep them guessing." The bridge crew moved in perfect unison, their trust in their captain absolute. As the battle unfolded, every decision carried weight, every second counted. The enemy flagship loomed ahead, a behemoth of war, its weapons priming for a devastating counterattack. Commander Elira Voss relayed critical updates from the lower decks. "Engineering is pushing the reactors to their limits, Captain. We can hold this pace, but not forever. If we're going to make our move, it has to be now." Vance exhaled sharply. "Then we commit. Charge the forward rail cannons and prepare the harpoon drives. We're taking this fight to them up close." As their ship surged forward, the enemy scrambled to respond. The sheer audacity of the maneuver caught them off guard, and before they could adjust their formations, the human warship had breached their defensive lines. Explosions rocked the enemy's hull, fire and debris spilling into the void. Vance seized the moment. "Launch boarding teams! Take that ship from the inside!" Elite strike teams deployed, cutting through the vacuum of space toward the enemy flagship. Inside, chaos reigned as corridors became battlegrounds. The enemy fought fiercely, but they were not prepared for the brutal efficiency of the human soldiers. Zara led one of the squads, moving with deadly precision as they carved a path toward the enemy command center. In the thick of the skirmish, Jackson provided covering fire, his rifle a blur of motion as he eliminated threats with practiced skill. "We need to get to their bridge before they can initiate a self-destruct sequence," he shouted over the comms. Zara nodded, driving her blade into an enemy soldier before pressing forward. "No time to waste. Move!" The battle inside the flagship mirrored the chaos outside. The human fleet pressed their advantage, hammering the remaining enemy ships into submission. Admiral Vera Sol, overseeing the operation from a secondary command vessel, hailed Vance. "Your gambit is working, Captain, but don't get reckless. We need that ship intact." "Understood, Admiral," Vance replied. "We'll get it done." Inside the enemy bridge, the last remnants of resistance fell. The enemy commander, wounded and defiant, glared at the human forces. "You think you've won? This war is far from over." Zara stepped forward, her weapon steady. "Maybe. But today, we take back what's ours." As the enemy flagship fell under human control, the tides of war shifted. The victory was theirs, but the battle for survival was far from over. The war would continue, but humanity had proven one thing beyond doubt: they would never back down. For the first time in human history, the nations of Earth came together, united by a single purpose: survival. Borders that once divided them became meaningless in the face of an existential threat. Governments set aside their differences, pooling resources and knowledge into a singular war effort. Factories that once built planes and tanks were now producing starfighters, plasma weapons, and energy shields. The world's brightest minds, from physicists to engineers, worked tirelessly to develop advanced propulsion systems, allowing humanity's first warships to move beyond Earth's orbit with unprecedented speed and maneuverability. The transition from terrestrial to interstellar warfare was not an easy one. Generals accustomed to leading ground forces had to rethink strategy entirely, as battlefields now spanned the cold vacuum of space. Admiral Richard Grant, appointed Supreme Commander of the newly formed United Earth Defense Fleet, oversaw the creation of Earth's first true space navy. Scientists at Luna Base and Mars Colony developed state-of-the-art energy weapons, capable of tearing through the hulls of enemy warships. The military-industrial complex churned out vast numbers of starships, from nimble interceptors to massive capital ships, each designed to counter the alien fleets they knew would come. Captain Kane led the first squadron of space-ready fighter pilots. Once an ace in atmospheric combat, he had to adapt to a new reality: zero-gravity dogfights, unpredictable enemy tactics, and the sheer vastness of space. Alongside him was Sergeant Thorne, a veteran soldier tasked with training ground troops to fight on alien worlds. Thorne's job was to prepare men and women for the impossible: combat in unfamiliar gravity fields, harsh planetary environments, and against alien foes who possessed unknown advantages. Then, a message arrived from the Sindari Collective, an alien race that had watched humanity's defiance from afar. They were not allies, but neither were they enemies. The warning was simple. The Velkar and Xyphos will not forget this. You have two choices: submit or fight. Humanity didn't hesitate. The decision had already been made. We fight. Mobilization reached its peak. Every sector of society contributed to the war effort. Civilians constructed orbital defense platforms, while programmers developed AI-controlled drones to assist in combat. Medical teams formulated emergency protocols for treating wounds caused by energy-based weaponry. Even artists and musicians played their role, producing propaganda to keep morale high and remind people why they fought: for the survival of their species. The first engagement was inevitable. The Velkar, a warlike species with reptilian features, had long viewed humanity as an inferior race, one unworthy of space-faring capabilities. The Xyphos, biomechanical entities that operated in ruthless efficiency, saw Earth as another resource to be assimilated into their vast machine empire. Together, they sent a vanguard fleet to test Earth's defenses. A dozen enemy warships emerged from hyperspace near Jupiter's orbit, expecting little resistance. They were wrong. Earth's new defense grid detected them instantly, alerting the fleet stationed at Europa. Admiral Grant ordered an immediate response. Within minutes, Earth's first battle-ready fleet was en route, consisting of newly constructed destroyers, heavy cruisers, and a squadron of starfighters led by Captain Kane. This was not just a battle, it was a statement. Humanity would not be cowed into submission. As Kane's squadron engaged the enemy fighters, he realized just how different this war was. The Velkar pilots fought with brutal aggression, relying on brute force and overwhelming numbers. The Xyphos drones moved with machine-like precision, reacting instantly to every maneuver. But humanity had something they didn't: adaptability. Kane and his pilots used unpredictable tactics, exploiting weaknesses either species expected. Meanwhile, on the ground, Sergeant Thorne led his troops in a training simulation that would soon become reality. They drilled on harsh, desolate landscapes, simulating the inevitable ground battles they would face. The Velkar were known for their savage close-quarters combat, and Thorne made sure his soldiers were prepared. They trained relentlessly, pushing their bodies and minds to the limit, knowing that the survival of their people depended on their readiness. Back in space, the battle over Jupiter raged on. Earth's warships took damage, but they fought back with a ferocity the enemy had not anticipated. A well-coordinated strike by Kane's squadron disabled the Velkar flagship, sending it into a catastrophic spiral toward the planet's surface. The remaining enemy ships, realizing their mistake, retreated into hyperspace. The first battle had been won, but it was only the beginning. The message was clear: humanity was not to be underestimated. The war for survival had begun. Expanding Part 7 to 5,000 words while maintaining continuity. The Xyphos Dominion, furious at their loss, declared Earth a high-priority target and began amassing their fleet for a full-scale invasion. Their war machine, built over centuries of conquest, churned out thousands of warships, each designed for planetary subjugation. Meanwhile, the Velkar, more pragmatic in their approach, saw an opportunity rather than a battle. Instead of outright war, they offered humanity a deal: join the Velkar Empire, and Earth would be spared. In exchange, humans would become Velkar subjects, fighting in their wars, expanding their territory, and integrating into their hierarchy. It was an offer wrapped in diplomacy but forged in chains. Some politicians, weary from the rapid escalation of war, considered the offer. They saw the overwhelming military power of both the Velkar and Xyphos and questioned whether humanity had the means to resist indefinitely. But Captain Kane, Commander Holt, Sergeant Thorne, and Dr. Voss knew the truth: submission was just a slow death in disguise. Once humanity was absorbed into the Velkar Empire, they would lose their freedom, their identity, and any hope of true independence. Earth would become a footnote in history, its people another species bound to an overlord's rule. As Earth's leaders debated their fate, Dr. Voss made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden within the wreckage of a downed Velkar warship was a database filled with encrypted star charts. At first, it seemed like standard navigational data, but as Voss delved deeper, she uncovered something extraordinary, an ancient map leading to an unknown system. The coordinates marked the location of a long-lost superweapon, a remnant of a war so old that even the Velkar and Xyphos had nearly forgotten it. If the records were accurate, this weapon had the potential to shift the balance of power in the galaxy. With time running out and war looming on Earth's horizon, Kane and his team convinced the world's leaders that this was humanity's best chance. The decision was made: Earth's first deep space fleet would be dispatched to retrieve the weapon. Every available warship, scientist, and soldier capable of making the journey was assembled. The mission was risky. There was no guarantee the weapon still functioned, or even existed. But if it did, it could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. The journey to the uncharted system was treacherous. As the fleet approached the designated coordinates, they encountered strange gravitational anomalies and shifting space currents, remnants of whatever ancient forces had once wielded the weapon. Upon arrival, they found themselves in the orbit of a long-dead world, its surface scarred with the remains of a civilization lost to time. Massive ruins stretched for miles, and among them stood a colossal structure, a fortress that predated even the Velkar's recorded history. It was there that the weapon was hidden. As ground teams descended, they discovered an eerie silence across the ruins. The fortress, built from a material unlike anything humans had ever seen, radiated energy despite the eons. Inside, the team found remnants of an extinct race, their bodies preserved in a way that suggested they had been caught in a final, desperate battle. Deep within the structure, they discovered the weapon, an ancient energy core, housed in a towering chamber lined with symbols that pulsed faintly with light. Activating the weapon wasn't simple. Dr. Voss and her team spent days deciphering the controls, careful not to trigger any fail-safe mechanisms that might destroy them all. But before they could finish, the Velkar arrived. Having intercepted fragments of Earth's transmissions, they knew what humanity was after, and they wanted it for themselves. A battle erupted in orbit as Earth's fleet fought desperately to hold the line against the Velkar warships. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Kane and his team raced against time to bring the weapon online. As the battle raged above, Voss made a breakthrough. The ancient core responded not just to technology but to biological input. It required something the long-extinct species had, a form of genetic key. Fortunately, centuries of Velkar experimentation had left traces of similar DNA within their own soldiers. Kane realized the grim solution: they needed Velkar genetic material to complete the activation. In a desperate move, Thorne led a strike team to capture a Velkar commander from the invading forces. Fighting their way through elite Velkar warriors, they managed to extract what they needed and rushed back to the fortress. With the final piece in place, the weapon roared to life. A surge of energy erupted from the core, sending shockwaves through the entire system. Velkar's ships in orbit faltered as their systems overloaded, and the very fabric of space rippled. But something else happened, something unexpected. The weapon wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was a beacon. Across the galaxy, hidden forces awakened, responding to a call that had remained silent for millennia. As the Velkar retreated, Earth's forces secured the fortress, but the war was far from over. The true nature of the weapon remained a mystery, and with its activation, something ancient had stirred. Now, humanity stood not just against the Velkar and Xyphos, but against whatever force had built the weapon in the first place. And they were coming.